So you're the COO of Bruce Power, and you have quite a lot of accolades to your name. So you've been recognized by the Globe and Mail for the Best Executive Award in 2022, the Platinum Jubilee Award in honor of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Radiation is a phenomenon that we really understand.
Absolutely.
We may not be able to see it, but we can measure it. We know how to manage it. We know how to protect against it. And we actually know so much about radiation that in your line of work, which is so important, we actually use radiation to improve patient outcomes.
Because now we take this PSMA molecule, attach it with lutetium, so it becomes a radioisotope. And this in the body, it can go and target exactly the prostate cancer cells all over the body, not just in the prostate, if they are spread elsewhere as well. And it's able to actively just kill those specific cells. And this has given birth to a whole field of theranostics.
So when you think about it from a medical isotope production point of view, all we're doing is we're finding a way for a target to have access to that neutron source.
So tell us more about Bruce Power. What is it and what's the primary scope of it, and how is it helping Canadians, especially people in Ontario?
Yeah, well, firstly, thanks very much for having me, and really excited to spend some time and have a conversation today on not only Bruce Power, but most importantly, the role in medical isotopes. So, to really answer your question, Bruce Power, we operate one of the world's largest nuclear generating facilities. We have 8 reactors. We're on the shores of Lake Huron in rural southwestern Ontario. And we produce about a third of Ontario's electricity. So 1 out of every 3 homes, schools, hospitals in the province are powered by Bruce Power.
So a third of Ontario's electricity is nuclear.
Well, actually, 60% of Ontario's electricity is nuclear, and we're just over 30 of that. So it's actually a fact a lot of people aren't familiar with. And nuclear...
That's because of the nomenclature, because here it's called hydro. When I moved to Canada and I had the hydro bill, I thought it was for water.
That's right.
But it's electricity. And you're telling me that the majority, 60%, is not actually from hydroelectric sources. It's actually nuclear.
Well, it's interesting. That's actually, it's funny you say that because you're exactly right. Hydro, so hydroelectric water power in the province of Ontario generates about a quarter of our electricity. Mm-hmm. I think the reason why people call it hydro based on Ontario's history is back well over 100 years ago, Ontario formed a company. It was owned by the government at the time called Ontario Hydro.
Okay.
And Ontario Hydro built, before we had nuclear plants and other ways of generating electricity, built Niagara Falls, a generating facility at that dam. So it was naturally getting hydroelectric power to the people of Ontario, and it became called Ontario Hydro. So you're right. Everybody calls it their hydro bill. But if you look at where you get your electricity today, and our electricity in Ontario, about a quarter of it is hydroelectric, 60% is nuclear.
Okay.
And then the balance is met through a combination of natural gas, wind, and solar. So we're a very when you compare us globally, we're a very what we call decarbonized electricity system. Well over 90% of our power comes from emissions sources of electricity that don't produce emissions. And so Bruce Power, we've been a company since 2001. We operate the Bruce site. But
so it's relatively newer.
Relatively new. And we've invested billions of dollars into the rejuvenation of that facility. Mm-hmm. We're not only Canada's largest public-private partnership, we're owned by OMERS and TC Energy in our unions, but we're one of the largest private funded electricity infrastructure programs in Canada. So really exciting time to be at Bruce Power. And, I'm happy with them calling it the hydro bill because I don't want them calling it the nuclear bill.
That is true. I guess the term nuclear comes often with a lot of negative connotation, not just in power generation, but also in medicine as well.
We talk about concepts that in science that sometimes people have a difficult time wrapping their head around, and radiation is one of those.
Absolutely.
Whether it's radiation in the work that you do saving patients' lives every day, or what we do. But what I always say is that radiation is a phenomenon that we really understand.
Absolutely.
We may not be able to see it, but we can measure it. We know how to manage it. We know how to protect against it. And we actually know so much about radiation that in your line of work, which is so important, we actually use radiation to improve patient outcomes, to diagnose
literally
and treat
detect
cancer.
The diseases
Absolutely.
And treat diseases.
And I think that's a real myth out there. You know, if we know enough about radiation that we use it to make patients better, to help
Absolutely.
people. We certainly know enough about it to protect ourselves about it when we see it in power application.
Yeah. So radiation and imaging, we primarily use it in X-rays and CTs.
Right.
But I guess that now, in addition to being one of the leaders in Canada and Ontario in power, you've also moved into the sphere in generation of medical isotopes. So how exactly did you get into medical isotopes, and what was the starting point of all of it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, I really start from the place as a really proud Canadian. For over 50 years, Canada has been a world leader in the production, the development, and the use of life-saving medical isotopes. If I look at our global system that we have today around the world for individuals like yourself who do amazing work every single day on the front lines of the healthcare system, Canada has really been a pioneer in the field of nuclear medicine. And we have developed as a country certain assets and certain infrastructure that no other country in the world has. Our power reactors are a unique design that allow us to produce medical isotopes. They're Canadian reactor design.
Okay.
We have a network of amazing institutions like UHN that you're a leader in. We have post-secondary institutions. We have processing capability. So I really start from that perspective to say that when the world thinks of nuclear medicine, the world thinks of Canada. It was 73 years ago. In London, Ontario, there was the first cobalt beam therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We actually made a stamp on it that year. That's what we used to do when we were proud of things. And so I really reflect on the fact that we have this proud history as Canadians, and our nuclear industry on the power generation side is a big part of that. So Bruce Power, having 8 of these reactors that we have an investment program to operate them to the 2060s and 2070s through one of our largest infrastructure projects, we really looked at how can our workers who are very, very passionate about what they do, what are some of the other contributions we can make? And using our power reactors provides us, and I know we'll talk about some of the isotopes a little bit later, provide us a unique opportunity to produce high volumes of life-saving medical isotopes. So to me, it's really about, it's what we do here in Canada. We lead the world. We leverage the infrastructure that we have, but we also bring people together to innovate, to find solutions that others haven't been able to find. And that's what we've done here in Canada with medical isotopes.
That's brilliant. So I understand that for power generation, you're primarily using uranium, which does come from Saskatchewan, I'm assuming.
Correct.
But then how did you figure out that you could generate medical isotopes as well? Like, what was the starting point of that in terms of you shifting focus from power generation also into medical isotope industry?
Yeah, so the way I would look at it is that one of the things that was really important for Bruce Power when we embarked on this was electricity generation will always be from let me say, a revenue perspective, 99% of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a reactor that operates to a high degree of reliability, and 8 of them. Mm-hmm. And those reactors have to produce electricity. It's their primary function. And to your point, we mine uranium here in Canada, and we get all of our fuel from a Canadian-based source and Cameco Corporation. They're based in Port Hope, Ontario, in terms of their supply to us. So when we embarked on this, we said that core focus of safely and reliably generating electricity, that can't change. But in generating that reliable electricity, think of the reactor as really just a large source of neutrons.
Okay.
Right. So you manage the power output from your reactor. You manage the production of nuclear energy by managing a neutron source. That's really all that uranium fuel is doing with heavy water is you're creating a neutron source that is driving that fission reaction. Mm-hmm. So when you think about it from a medical isotope production point of view, all we're doing is we're finding a way for a target to have access to that neutron source. So what we developed in our reactors is our reactors have a series of ports,
okay,
that allow us to monitor really the neutron levels for power generation. And what we've been able to do is develop a delivery system that utilizes one of those ports to really irradiate targets using that neutron source. So while we're producing medical isotopes and electricity, they're using the same reactor, but they don't really conflict with each other in any way. So think about, we got this large neutron source, and we want to pick up some of those neutrons to make isotopes like cobalt-60, lutetium-177, and hopefully down the road, many more isotopes.
That's smart. kind of in a way, it's like regenerative braking, in which you have a port for which you need to monitor, but then you're using that to generate isotopes. Similar to how during braking you're generating electricity. Here you're generating electricity, but in that process you're able to prevent wastage and then generate isotopes as a kind of a byproduct to a certain extent, I guess.
Yeah. And I think what's really important about this is that power reactors for electricity generation, they are very reliable units. We invest a lot in the safety and the reliability and the equipment of those units. On a site like Bruce, I mentioned we produce a third of Ontario's power. That's why we have 8 units. So if a unit has to be taken offline for planned maintenance, or what we're doing right now for multi-year planned refurbishment campaigns so they can run decades and decades, you have other units generating electricity. So I'll give you a day like today. We have 8 reactors at Bruce. 2 of these units are offline on a planned major investment overhaul. We call it a major component replacement, but we still have 6 other units running. So it's not like Ontario is short power because we're maintaining those units. And we're really trying to bring that same principle to isotope production. How do we do that? And our colleagues at Ontario Power Generation who operate the Darlington and Pickering facilities are looking to do the same. So this is I don't want to make it all about Bruce Power. We're really proud of what we've done, but this is part of Team Canada. Bruce Power has also been able to achieve this by partnering with a lot of important organizations and people who bring expertise to the table. We partnership with Ottawa-based Nordion on our cobalt program. We wouldn't be where we are without Nordion. We partnered with a firm called Isogen. It's owned by Kinetrix and Framatome here in Ontario. On this, we've also partnered with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, First Nations community. We operate our site on their traditional territory. And I always say that if you want to be serious about reconciliation, you have to focus on reconciliation. And so this was an opportunity for us to work with that community. So to me, while I love talking about everything Bruce Power has done, and I'm so proud of our workers and engineers and operators and maintenance people, building trades who have made this happen, this has really been a Team Canada approach. Because one of the things in business that I think is so important, or any organization, is you have to identify the things that you're strong at, and you have to identify the areas that you need to bring other people to the table. And that's really what we've tried to do.
Bring in expertise.
Absolutely. And you do that every day in your job, right?
Pretty much.
And that's, I think actually that's what's some really strong about like in your field. When I look at how you and your colleagues have tumor boards and cross-functional challenge, that is great leadership and a great way to think about really any challenge we have out there.
Yeah. Like what used to be called tumor boards, now we call them as multidisciplinary cancer care teams.
I love that. Yeah.
Which is just perfect, which kind of clearly shows how it's a team building and team making. And it's amazing that you've kind of done exactly that in the power generation space as well as isotope generation space. In terms of isotopes, what are the isotopes which are being produced by Bruce Power? Yeah,
so right now we're focused on 2 primary streams of isotopes. We sort of have our long-lived isotope stream, which are isotopes that have a longer half-life. So they take a longer time to produce in the reactor, but then they're also able to be used for a longer period of time after. So that's primarily the cobalt-60. So cobalt-60 takes about 3 years to irradiate, to pick up that neutron source in the reactor. And every 3 years we harvest it. And that
so it's a 3-year process.
It's a 3-year process. So it takes 3 years to irradiate, and we take that cobalt-60 and it's really used in 3 primary streams with our partnership at Nordion. It's used to sterilize billions of pieces of medical equipment that you use every day, all over the world. It's used in brain tumors and breast cancer and gamma pod and gamma knife technology. And so that's a long-lived isotope. So it takes 3 years to get it to the level we need it at, but it also means that it lasts almost a similar amount of time out in the field or out in applications. Those are long-lived isotopes. We also have a second stream, which is short-lived isotopes. And that's really where lutetium comes in. So when we talked about access to that neutron source, that's where we developed the capability to produce short-lived medical isotopes. So we produce lutetium-177. It takes anywhere from 7 to 14 days to irradiate, depending on the product we want to develop. But it also only lasts for a similar amount of time when it's out of the reactor, which makes sense, right? Because most of the medical isotopes that you and your colleagues use, they're short-lived medical isotopes. We don't want them to last for a long time if it's for diagnostic or therapeutics. And so we're really now into both. And what our strategy is, working with our partners of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, Isogen, Nordion, is how do we now use this capability to further expand it? Typically, these isotopes were produced in a research reactor. Think of the power of a research reactor as like lighting a match. The power of a reactor is like the sun. So we have a lot of neutron activity we can take advantage of. So I think you're going to see this continue to grow. You see the province of Ontario under Premier Ford and Minister Lecce really making medical isotopes a priority for Ontario. You saw it with the approval of Pluvicto,
yep.
But also our federal government. So I think this is a strategic sector for Canada and for Ontario.
That's brilliant. So as regards, let's talk about each of them separately. Like as regards cobalt, I understand that you're one of the leading producers.
That's right.
Not just in Ontario, or not just in Canada, but kind of in the world.
That's right.
Which is amazing that quite a lot of success stories of Canada aren't reaching people. So this is amazing that in Canada, you're pretty much dominating this production of cobalt-60. And that's just really amazing to kind of hear how much it has affected medicine in terms of sterilization. So we know that radiation is kind of bad, but again, that's the best way to get rid of all organisms,
Absolutely.
just make them completely sterile, which in turn can improve medical care because there's going to be extremely less infection rates caused by all of
Absolutely.
these like gloves and syringes and all of that.
Well, and you know this better than anybody. If you go back into the data 50 years ago, and we still have it, unfortunately, in a lot of healthcare settings in other jurisdictions around the world where the risk of infection to a patient is many times higher than the risk of whatever procedure they're going in for. And so sterilization using cobalt-60 has been a major game changer for the world with that sterilization. And I also do want to give a shout out to our friends at Ontario Power Generation who operate Darlington and Pickering. Darlington is going to start producing cobalt-60.
That's amazing.
But right now, between Pickering and Bruce Power, we talk about Bruce Power being a leader in this, but if you put Ontario as Team Ontario together, we, from a global perspective, dominate the world in cobalt production. So it's a great Ontario success story, but most importantly, it's something that we started to take for granted in the sense that we now have all this sterilization. And I remember during COVID, you know, you look at all the products that are used in vaccine production. You look at COVID swabs, all of those kind of things. A lot of that equipment uses cobalt-60.
That's amazing. And then moving to lutetium-177, and this is where things get really, really exciting. So we had a previous podcast with Dr. Patrick White-Heibach, who's one of the nuclear medicine physicians here. He's the deputy chief in radiology, and it was on theranostics. So the entire field of theranostics hinges on availability of this particular molecule, at least currently. We might have more molecules down the line. But in a sense, what it is that conventionally, when we were treating cancers, we would do anatomic imaging, that is with CT or MRI, which will show us where a cancer is. And then that can be targeted either by surgery or by focal ablation or by chemotherapeutic drugs, which are a bit more general and broad. But then came this era of nuclear medicine in which we have specific molecules. For example, in prostate, we have PSMA, or prostate-specific membrane antigen, which can go and attach to the prostate cancer cells and not anywhere else in the body. So this helped us to identify and diagnose prostate cancers. And we were like, this is amazing. We are now able to diagnose not just cancer, but when it spreads across the body, we're able to diagnose it very well. But how do we treat it? We still have to rely on our older methods of treatment. And that's where lutetium has been game-changing. Because now we take this PSMA molecule, attach it with lutetium, so it becomes a radioisotope. And this in the body, it can go and target exactly the prostate cancer cells all over the body, not just in the prostate, if they are spread elsewhere as well. And it's able to actively just kill those specific cells. And this has given birth to a whole field of theranostics, and of which you're aware, and you probably played a big role in Pluvicto, which is basically like lutetium attached to PSMA for treatment in prostate cancer. And I think that Ontario is the first province, one of the first province where it's been approved for clinical use, which is absolutely amazing, because even when I started medicine and now it's a seismic shift, and we expect that things are going to change much more down the line. Not like currently it's being used for PRRT in neuroendocrine tumors as well as in prostate cancer. But down the line, as research matures, we might have it in more cancers, which really defines personalized medicine. So from your perspective, like, are you actively looking into other molecules which you can generate? But even prior to that, like lutetium-177, like, what is the precursor for it? I can understand it's something called ytterbium. Like, do we produce it here, or how does that supply chain till production work?
Yeah. So I firstly, I totally agree with you. And I think, you and your colleagues and Patrick have just been outstanding leaders in this field. And I think it's not only important for Ontario and Canada, but the world. If I take a step back, the sad reality, and you deal with this every day in your practice, 40% of us in our lives will get cancer. Yeah. But 100% of us will be impacted, whether it's our friends, our neighbors, our loved ones. And so at a very fundamental level, I look at this as how do we, as an isotope community, working with frontline providers like you and experts like you, how do we provide the best tools for when people are faced with that, frankly, devastating news? Mm-hmm. I chair an organization called the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario, POGO. You may have heard about mm-hmm. POGO. And what I'm always reminded of is that people who are cancer survivors, being a cancer survivor is something that's with you the rest of your life. A lot of times we have to clearly fight the cancer and do our best to push it back, to beat it. But there's long-lived impacts that all survivors have. And that's why I tie this in with your question, because I think the way I describe lutetium-177, and you described it far better than I would, but I look at it like a heat-seeking missile.
Pretty much,
right?
Yeah.
We want to find the cancer, and we want to do our best to push back or destroy the cancer without
harming anything else.
If that can be done in a way that minimizes surgical intervention or other, and you would describe those better than me. And so I look at it also from the perspective of quality of life and impact on the patient. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm really excited about with these theranostics, right? Combination of diagnostics and therapy. And so our view of this is, and we're very fortunate to have a partnership with ITM. They're German based. We've talked about that. They provide the vast majority of the lutetium, non-carriated lutetium to Novartis for Pluvicto.
Okay.
And we're working very closely with them. But if you look across the spectrum, there, in addition to the neuroendocrine tumors and prostate cancer, there's over 200 trials and studies underway for the use of lutetium. See it very heavily potentially with lung cancer as an example. So I see this as a heat-seeking missile that I'm hoping we can use for a lot of treatments for patients. And it doesn't mean that what we have today is not going to need to, this is about providing you more tools in the toolbox. It doesn't mean lutetium is going to be the silver bullet for everything. To answer your question specifically on the base product, what we do is we irradiate in a target that's about that big. I should have brought I usually have one in my bag, but not with lutetium in it. Usually it's a dummy product, right? But we irradiate ytterbium-176. Okay. And ytterbium-176 is something that we've started working with our partners at Kinetrix to really increase Canadian production of that. And that ytterbium-176, think about it as it goes into the reactor in a target, it picks up those neutrons, and what comes out is lutetium-177.
Okay.
So I think lutetium is going to be a isotope we talk about for a long time. And I just hope that I do not believe production of large volumes of lutetium is going to be a problem anymore. You see what we can do here in Ontario. Yeah. In one small fraction of what one of our reactors can do, we can provide the global supply entirely from one reactor easily.
Oh, really?
We have multiple reactors. We have
the reason I was asking that is because Currently, the use of Pluvicto or for prostate cancers is only in very specific indications.
That's right.
As research matures, it's expected to increase for more indications as well as for more cancers.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions I was going to ask you is that, would you be able to keep up with
Absolutely. Production is not going to be a barrier going forward as a result of what we've done here in Ontario and Canada. We've had 2 years of reliable production. We've never missed a shipment. Now we're working to install the system on another one of our units for that redundancy.
Okay.
We do have research reactors we can partner with. We have our friends at Ontario Power Generation. They're irradiating and producing molybdenum-99. So we're looking at how we can work with them. We want to provide that reliability. But just like when you flick on the light switch in Ontario, you're never worried that light is going to come on or off.
Yeah.
That's our job to take care of that. And so by providing that reliability, we allow the rest of the system to say, let's focus on getting this to patients as quickly as possible. Because I'm always reminded, and I know you'll be in the hospital this afternoon. People can't wait, right? We need to accelerate as a country the support for this kind of advancement. We have the supply. Supply is not an issue. We cannot, in my view, we have to be safe. We have to be prudent. No one's questioning that. But the real challenge for us is how do we accelerate? And I know that if I had a family member that had a cancer diagnosis, I'd be really hoping that people are working around the clock to make sure people like yourself have the best tools available. And I think that's where I credit Ontario with Pluvicto, but I think lutetium can be dramatically expanded and accelerated.
That's amazing, because in Canada, like, one of the criticisms about healthcare here is that there are increasing wait times to see the family physician, to see a specialist, to get imaging done, to get a biopsy done, to establish a cancer diagnosis. But what you're saying is that if there are 99 problems, availability of Pluvicto is not going to be an issue because you have taken care of that. That's one less thing for us to worry about. And that's amazing that you've set that up. And you're also looking into the future to expand capacity to keep up with requirements as and when it kind of comes.
And what I would also say is it's pretty clear, and the demographic trends are only going to continue, that our healthcare system is going to continue to be under more and more pressure as we have an aging population, and also as we have more and better treatments available for people. And so when we talk about the importance of patient outcomes, and you talked about lutetium, that may be able to be used in certain cases, not only is that a better outcome for the patient that we've talked about, it's actually a better outcome for the healthcare system
as a whole.
If it can minimize a surgical procedure.
Yes.
Right. So if we're personalized medicine, heat-seeking missiles, as I like to call them, where they can be used, not only a better outcome for the patient, but they also reduce the burden on the healthcare system.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's how we have to think about it. It's not about, this is always the challenge when you start to have a system that is clearly challenged with resources and capability and demand and very important things to people. How do you find a way to meet that demand in a way that it's a win-win? And I think, you can tell me whether you think I have that right or not, but I think there are these win-wins out there.
True, because a lot of times when we think about issues and rate limiting steps and problems, we always think that the only answer is increasing capacity for everything. However, the way you put it, for example, if let's say that we administer lutetium and we are able to treat the patient better, the patient might need less frequent follow-ups, which means that now more slots are available. Patient might need less frequent imaging. Patient might need less procedures, which essentially makes the whole system more efficient and opens up available slots for other patients.
Well, it's a good point. And I as I mentioned earlier, I live in a rural area. And access is an issue for people in rural areas, right? And we know there will always be centers like Toronto and London and Hamilton and Ottawa, I don't want to miss any, that will be areas people have to travel to for certain specialized care. And while we want to bring more close to home, there's a reality there as well. And so less frequent visits, that's removing a barrier. We know people who may not have work in organizations or earn a living in a way that gives them a lot of schedule flexibility. Sometimes that's a barrier that people don't get the full treatment that they may. So to me, I think it's also removing some of that equality of care that we really want to have all Canadians have access to. And so I'm very, very excited about its potential. As I say, it can just never move fast enough for me.
That's amazing. The future looks incredibly bright and exciting and promising. And when Bruce Power, it's named Bruce Power, but the first time I heard Bruce Power, the thing I could think of was like Bruce Almighty, the movie in which it's like God, it's taking care of everybody around it. But you've termed yourself Bruce Power. And we all know with great power comes great responsibility, or at least that's what our wise Spider-Man has
That's what Spider-Man says.
Absolutely. So, which means that...
I'm glad you're using a Spider-Man analogy, not a Simpsons analogy. Right? So that's what I normally get being a nuclear person, so...
Yeah, I guess like the Marvel and all these superheroes are in vogue now, so that seems to be like the de facto thing to quote these days.
And I have to tell you that, I really enjoy these kind of conversations and talking about everything we do. But when you talk about the people who are making this happen, I talked about our partners, but I always start by recognizing the women and men that we have at Bruce Power who do this work. I mean, they are just amazing people in a range of fields, from operations to maintainers to tradespeople, various technical disciplines. And this is really, it's a tremendous privilege to be able to talk about their success.
Absolutely.
But like in any organization, I'm sure you see this at UHN, I'm always reminded that we are not in a technical business, either of us. It is very technical, but it is not a technical business. It's a people business. And our job is how you bring these amazing people together to do great things. And so, I'll give a shout out to them as the superheroes.
Absolutely. So James, what do you think the future holds?
We provide here as Canadians a lot of really important core resources for the world. We talk about aluminum and steel. We talk about auto. We talk about uranium. We talk about critical minerals. We talk about energy, oil and gas. Isotopes also fit in with that.
Yes.
And so I am, I believe over the long run where we need to get to as between Canada and the U.S. is, and Premier Ford has talked about this, is what does a Can-Am fortress look like in terms of energy security, energy dominance? You can't have economic security without energy security. And really a medical isotope is just another form of energy. And so it's really important, I think, for us to tie medical isotopes to this energy security pact. And so to me, medical isotope supply and engagement is part of how we work together. I think that there is more that we can do when we work together. I also always remind people that facts are our friend. And if you look at the 26 U.S. states, Ontario is the number 1 or number 2 exporter for those states. So 6 to 9 million Americans go to work every single day to sell people like you and I products. That's important to jobs in the U.S. And when you take oil and gas out of the equation, which we sell to the U.S. at a discounted price because they have refining capability, the U.S. actually has a $50 billion trade surplus with us, meaning they sell us $50 billion more of goods than we buy from them on a $1 trillion overview. And so if anybody should be concerned about a trade deficit, it's actually us. And so I think we got to be united. And I think the more we can engage with U.S. policymakers and share those facts, I think we'll get to a win-win.
That's amazing. The way you put it, medical isotopes are not just poised to treat diseases, to improve lives of patients. They're going to affect much, much more than that, because they're going to help patients be cured of diseases. They're going to help the families of the patients who they can live with and enjoy their presence longer. They're going to open up jobs and a lot of people here in Canada, and Canada becomes a leader in this production. But not just that, in addition to ensure that there is less friction in the world, we need cooperation, economic stability, and energy is going to be a principal part of it. And tied in with that, medical isotopes are going to be a crucial part of this.
Absolutely.
So in a way, in addition to improving a lot of lives, it's actually going to bring people across the world closer together for a better future for everybody. And it's amazing that Bruce Power is on the forefront of that.
Well, thanks for having me, and looking forward to our continued partnership with you, HN.
Thanks, James. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.